Good morning, girls. I have been doing something for Quinn recently. I have been making recordings of me reading this book to her and sending it to her. And it dawned on me, I should be doing the same thing for you guys. You guys love me reading to you too. And so, look what I found in our library. Wayside School. I think we have 2 chapters left in the book. So I thought I would read them to you. How's that sound? Good? Yeah. Okay. So it is a rainy, icky day out. It's really early. I got my coffee. Susan's coming over in a little bit. And then I have the rest of the presents to wrap. Ooh, there's going to be a whole pile of them when you come over. Are you excited? I know I am. I'm also sending you a special package in the mail. I'll probably send it out today, so you'll need to keep an eye out for it. Wonder what's in it. Just have to wait and see. But in the meantime, let's read the last 2 chapters. So this chapter is called VALOOOSH. I know you guys like seeing the pictures, so there it is. What do you think it's about? My guess? Dancing. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Mrs. Jules rang her cowbell. "I have some wonderful news," she said. The children stopped what they were doing and looked up. They waited for Mrs. Jules to tell them the wonderful news. "You are a very lucky class indeed," said Mrs. Jules. "Mrs. VALOOOSH, the famous dancer, will be coming here to Wayside School. She will teach you how to dance." Everyone was still waiting for the wonderful news. "Isn't that exciting?" asked Mrs. Jules. "You will see her every Wednesday instead of going to PE." "Will girls have to dance with boys?" asked Jenny. "I suppose," said Mrs. Jules. "Gross," said Leslie. "Yuck," said Dana. "Will boys have to dance with girls?" asked Ron. "Obviously," said Mrs. Jules. "No way," said Eric Fry. "I'd rather dance with a dead rat," said Terrence. Everybody started talking at once about cooties, warts, and the horrible diseases you get from touching girls or boys. Mrs. Jewell rang her cowbell again and told them to settle down. "Mrs. Jules, I don't need to take dancing lessons," said Eric Bacon. "I already know how to dance." "Yes, Eric, I've seen you dance," Mrs. Jules said sarcastically. Eric Bacon was a great break dancer, but breakdancing was no longer allowed at Wayside School. That was because every time Eric danced, he broke something. "Mrs. VALOOOSH will teach you to dance with grace and beauty and train you in classical ballroom dancing," said Mrs. Jules. Everybody groaned. "Ugh." Can you groan with me? "Ugh." Ugh. On Wednesday, they all headed down to their first dancing lesson, except Myron. Myron went to PE. "How come Myron never has to do anything?" asked Jason. "I don't know," said Calvin. "I've been wondering that too." "Myron's father must be friends with the president," said Bebe. "I think Myron gave Mrs. Kidswater, the principal, $1,000, said Todd. "No, I bet he's blackmailing Mrs. Jules," said Jenny. "How could he do that?" said Benjamin. "Maybe Mrs. Jules got drunk," said Jenny, "and then she danced on top of a desk with a lampshade on her head. And Myron took a picture of her. And so now Mrs. Jules has to let Myron do anything he wants, or else he'll show the picture to Mrs. Kidswater." "That makes sense," said Mac. "Except if she had a lampshade on her head, how would Mr. Kidswater know that it was Mrs. Jules?" asked Todd. No one knew the answer to that. They entered the room on the second floor. "Welcome," said Mrs. VALOOOSH, a strange-looking woman with bright red hair. It looked like her head was on fire. "My name is Miss VALOOOSH. It's so wonderful to be here at Wayside School." She wore pink tights and a sparkling pink top. "I hope we will be friends, yes?" she asked. Nobody said a word. All around were red and green balls. There was also one yellow ball. This was the room where Miss Lewis kept the balls for lunch and recess. It was also the room that was always used for school dances. It was a ballroom. So, exclaimed Mrs. VALOOOSH, who will be first? Everyone tried to hide behind someone else. Mrs. VALOOOSH put her hands on Ron's face. What is your name? She asked. Ron, he squeaked. Ronaldo, bellowed Mrs. VALOOOSH. King of the Gypsies. I don't know how to dance, said Ron. Dance? Said Mrs. VALOOOSH. She looked very surprised. We are not going to dance, she said. We're not? Said Ron. No, Ronaldo, whispered Mrs. VALOOOSH. We are going to tango. She put her left arm around Ron's waist. Then she grabbed his left hand with her right hand and stuck it way out front of them. Suddenly, the music started. Mrs. VALOOOSH dragged poor Ron across the room as she stomped her feet in time to the music. Dump, dum, 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 da 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 dum, 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 dum. Hey! When she yelled, hey, she threw Ron up in the air and clapped her hands. Ron turned a somersault in the midair when Mrs. VALOOOSH caught him. They tangoed back to where they started. Ron's eyes were spinning in opposite directions. Hey, that looked like fun, said Mauricia. Do me! Very well, said Mrs. VALOOOSH. She grabbed Mauricia and tangoed with her across the room. Dump, da dump, da dump, da 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 dump, 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 dump. Hey! She threw Mauricia up in the air and clapped her hands. Mauricia turned a double somersault before Mrs. VALOOOSH caught her. They tangoed back to the front. My turn, said Terence. As Mrs. VALOOOSH tangoed with Terence and other kids stamped their feet along with Mrs. VALOOOSH, they all yelled, hey! Let's do it together. 1, 2, 3. Hey! At the same time and clapped their hands. Okay, it's coming up again. So this time we're going to do it together, okay? So get ready. One by one, Mrs. VALOOOSH tangoed with every kid in the class. The other kids danced with the other boys, or with each other. Boys danced with girls, and girls danced with boys. They didn't care. Paul danced with Leslie. Dana danced with John. Terrence danced with Rondi. Allison danced with Jason. DJ danced with Kathy. Todd danced with Joy. 1, 2, 3. Hey! Did you do it? Want to do it one more time? 1, 2, 3. Hey! There you go. Of course, they weren't strong enough to throw each other up in the air. Instead, they tried to trip each other or throw each other to the ground. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Hey! Even Kathy was having fun. She said, hey! She shouted as she kicked DJ in the rear end. They also threw balls at each other. 1, 2, 3. Hey! Mrs. VALOOOSH began to get tired. Sometimes she didn't catch the children after she tossed them in the air. Oops. Dee Dee crashed to the floor. Wow, she said. This is more fun than Murder the Man with the Ball. Well, that doesn't sound like a fun game. At last the music stopped. Dump, 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 and everyone shouted for the last time. 1, 2, 3. Hey! Mrs. VALOOOSH clapped her hands. Wonderful! She exclaimed. Fantastique! They all staggered out of the ballroom, cut up, bruised, and bleeding. Next week, we shall waltz. Mrs. VALOOOSH called after them. So, how did everyone like dancing? Asked Mrs. Jules when they returned. Dance, said Ronaldo, king of the gypsies. We didn't dance. You didn't, said Mrs. Jules. No, said Ronaldo. We tangoed. Everyone cheered. It was wonderful, exclaimed Kathy. Fantastique, said Terence. Myron was sorry he missed it. I can't wait till next Wednesday, said Todd. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. I'll start another video for the last one. I think it's the last one. Let's see. Oh, it is. I might have to find another new Wayside storybook, huh? I love them because the chapters are short and they're always little fun stories, right? Okay, I love you both. I'll send you more stories.